Hi everyone, welcome to week two. We're going to look at graduate school applications and academic careers. We're going to start off with academic careers. We're going to talk a little bit about what I know about that, which is something. And then I'm going to talk afterwards about kind of choosing a program. You'll notice our assignment this week is for you to have a go at choosing a program or choosing a few programs and kind of trying to think of yourself in that role. There's obviously two main options when you go into graduate school. One option is the master's, right, where you're looking at a specific course that's going to help you advance your career. It's going to give you the edge, maybe give you extra experience, extra time to delve into a particular course of study, and it's going to help you in your career, help you to get some of the sort of job. And then there's a PhD, which is obviously the way that I went. Either of in the choosing a program option, either of those things, either of those options. My advice, I guess, is valid for either of those options. In terms of academic careers, what I'm going to talk about mostly are, what you might do if you were to go ahead and get a PhD, what sort of avenues that might open. It's worth pointing out before I get into that if it's teaching that you're interested in particular, you want to teach at an institution of higher education, that is sometimes possible with a master's degree, right? And so it's possible that with a master's degree, as well as some experience, that you would be a good, solid candidate for certainly for a community school, a community college. Oftentimes they advertise for people with master's degrees. But even they oftentimes will put that they prefer PhDs. So academic careers might be fairly limited. Academic career options might be fairly limited with a master's. But a master's degree is a great way to add on to some experience and some expertise that you already have to make you more competitive for certain jobs. Okay. So with that said, though, a lot of this about academic careers is probably relevant if you are willing and interested in pursuing a PhD. So what's out there? Well, academic careers consist usually of a combination of teaching, research, and service. Teaching and research might sound fairly self-explanatory. Service generally, right, is in tenure track positions, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Professors that certainly professors at ASU who are tenure track professors, they will have each of them some sort of responsibility for running the school or the department which they're a part of. And so usually they'll serve on committees in that respect, and they'll serve on different committees and as advisors to sometimes as advisors to the director. But they'll be responsible for, let's say, undergraduate education might be one committee. And so there'll be a committee of professors who are deciding what sort of courses should be required for which degrees. They'll be making sure that each course has a teacher, right? That sort of thing. Those are administrative duties of the school. Oftentimes, certainly in big research institutions, and we'll talk about differences in institutions as well, that's going to be part of the job. Not just in big research institutions, of course, probably throughout all institutions. If you think of coming down to what we might think of sometimes as the other end of the spectrum, right, from ASU, which is a PhD granting institution, across to maybe a community college, which grants associate degrees, probably at the top of what the degrees that it grants. There'll also be the faculty there will also, it's usually a smaller faculty, but they'll usually take responsibility for running undergraduate education, right? With internships, right? There might be a structure in place for reaching out to potential internships for undergraduates, perhaps, and maintaining those contacts and getting that information out and just administering that side of things. And that might be another committee that you would serve on. And so that's what it means by service. But generally, and this is going to vary institution to institution, larger public PhD granting institutions that do a lot of research, you're going to tend to have maybe You're going to teach. Mostly, you're going to teach. Pretty much, when I say mostly, I mean pretty much everybody's going to teach 1 or 2 classes. Two is common. Like 2 in the fall semester, 2 in the spring semester is a common teaching load at a PhD granting high research institution. You're going to have some service responsibilities that might take up perhaps another 20% of your time or 30% of your time. And then you're going to have research responsibilities are going to be the highest. Is going to be a lot of emphasis is going to be on that research activity that you do. That's going to vary. There's going to be other institutions such as master's granting institutions or bachelor's granting institutions. Usually the less high of a degree which offered by the university, the more teaching is required. That's usually the case for academic careers. So you might have less of a research requirement and more of a teaching requirement. You might have an equal amount of service requirement at each one. So that's kind of the ratio of teaching to research is going to be the main difference. And so think about those two things, right? If you're interested in research at all, an academic career will take you that way. If you're interested in teaching, you can go that way too. And then there's obviously combinations. You can get a job exclusively teaching, like the job that I have. You can get a job that's almost exclusively research, or at least heavily emphasized on the research. You might teach probably 2 classes there a semester. Maybe you'll teach 1 class, right? You'll get a class buyout or something like that. And then service is usually going to be required unless you're only teaching. What I want to say in terms of a research career or an academic career is that very oftentimes, especially if you have a heavy research load, it's self-directed and you can be fairly independent. What I mean by that is that this is a great opportunity as you get tenure to really focus on whatever you're interested in. Write about what you're interested in, research what you're interested in. You get to decide. And usually, as long as you're putting out publications, as long as you're writing articles and writing books and getting them published, in good places. So, in other words, as long as you are sort of adhering to the standards of the discipline that you're in terms of those publications, then you can study what you want. And this is great news if you have some things that you're passionate about and you can see yourself researching and writing about. Even teaching, right? Oftentimes you'll have some input and some discussion about what you would be interested in teaching, right? And usually, you teach what you're an expert in, and usually that field of expertise you've decided yourself. So that's one of the benefits of that. Another benefit, kind of in keeping with that, is this idea of tenure. You might spend 5 years as an assistant professor. If you went on the tenure track route, you might spend 5 years as an assistant professor, kind of proving your research credentials, getting things out there, getting things published, also teaching, right, and making sure you can teach. And at the end of those 5 years, you get promoted, right? You get your file gets reviewed. The research that you've done, the publications, your teaching gets reviewed, and you get tenure, right? And at that point, when you get tenure, that's a fairly good position to be in. And so that kind of goes with this idea of self-directed and independent research. At that point, it's very hard to lose your job, right? So you really have a lot of freedom, right? This is about kind of granting academic freedom to study whatever you want in whatever way you want, while recognizing that there's still further up the career ladder to move, and that if you want to progress further, that you might be tactical about what you choose to research and how you choose to do it. But you get a lot of leeway, which is what I'm trying to emphasize here as a bonus from that, trying to convince you into it maybe. Funding sources, I've written a slide with the words funding and sources on there. This is another kind of speaks again to the independence and the self-directedness. There's a lot of sources out there where you can find money to support your research. It might take you to other parts of the country, other parts of the world. Right? We're all global studies students in here, I believe. people who are interested in the world, interested in traveling, no doubt people who have traveled. I saw that on your introductions, right? Lots of you have lived and been in other places. Those sorts of experiences, that field research. There's a lot of sources out there, government sources. Government sources are the ones that come to mind immediately, but there are other sources out there too, institutions that will fund your research, right? And you'll get to travel around on that money and conduct your research where you would like. Lots and lots of funding sources out there. Of course, it's competitive, but people, academics usually do get grants, right? Of various amounts to support this sort of research. Lots of opportunities out there. I've talked about this idea of tenure track versus non-tenure track. I think you'll find that at ASU as an institution right now, not in my school itself, but across the whole institution, I think the faculty right now is 50-50 split. Right? 50% are tenure track professors who are probably focused lots on research and probably do teach also. Almost certainly do teach as well, but maybe 2 classes a semester. And then the non-tenure track. This is a growing portion of the faculty, not only at ASU, but at all universities in the United States. Usually these are teaching-focused positions where you get to teach, probably up to 5 classes a semester, right? 4 or 5 classes is common for non-tenure track faculty members. These are still full-time jobs that receive benefits and a decent salary. Oftentimes, non-tenure track people are still eligible to apply for these grants, right, and get money maybe to go to conferences and that sort of thing. Certainly at big public institutions, that's the case. So a non-tenure track, it's a big part of what's going on right now. It's a big part of the faculty across the United States, and it's growing. So in this field, you might get 1, 2, 3, 4, 5-year contracts that you would work at, and you'd usually be teaching there. Of course, while I'm talking about these 2 things, I should say that at places that are mostly teaching institutions, like community colleges especially, you might well get a tenure track job there where you're almost with no research requirement, where you're mostly teaching, right? And then you'll have some service too, probably there. So there's those 2 things to think about. And then the variety of institutions we've talked about. We've talked about PhD granting institutions like ASU, where they're heavily focused on research. Big public universities that you've heard of are probably usually focused on research. Community colleges, which we've talked about, are almost exclusively focused on teaching. There's very little research that's coming out of those. And then you have places in the middle. You have places like liberal arts colleges, right, where teaching and being skilled teachers is highly valued, but they'll expect still some research. You'll have some research component probably to your job there, although it probably wouldn't place the same demands on you as it would at a large public university in terms of research, but your teaching load will be higher. And so those are a few different opportunities, a few different places you would go in an academic career. Also, people with PhDs find jobs outside of the academy as well in research. There's other types of research institutions, I guess consultancies, that sort of thing, as well, maybe political consultancies. I'm thinking of political science, which is where my background is. But as I'm about to say, it's worth considering political science as well as other social sciences and even humanities after a global studies degree. And so this brings us nicely on to the subject of choosing a graduate program. I want to just go through briefly and give you a kind of some advice on if you're going to pursue a PhD, even a master's. Here's a way that I would go about it. And I'm going to ask you actually to practice that, to do this process for your assignment this week, right? Because I'd like to give you the chance to put this process into practice and to have some time to really strongly consider perhaps going to graduate school and pursuing graduate education. So here's how I would advise choosing a program. First of all, consider a variety of disciplines and faculty. This is actually my only slide, but I'm going to talk around this for a few minutes probably. Here's what I advise you to do. Maybe you know some people already, faculty that you've worked with perhaps, or that you've taken classes from, where you think maybe their research is interesting. If I was going to go to graduate school, I think I'd like to do research on those same topics in that same field. What I suggest that you do, while keeping those people in mind, certainly keeping those people in mind, especially if you've already worked with them. Also, have a look at Google Scholar. Start to look at some of the papers, or better still, some papers that you've read or that have been assigned, perhaps that are more recent. And look into the authors of those pieces. Find out where they are, what courses they teach, what programs they teach in, perhaps. You can either in old papers or find some papers on Google Scholar and find the authors of them. And let's investigate a little bit. If I was going to go to graduate school, maybe I'd like to work with these people. I think one of the important things about graduate school is who ends up supervising you. Either who helps supervise your master's thesis, or who helps supervise maybe for 3 or 4 or longer years your PhD dissertation. Right? Obviously, you want to find somebody whose research interests overlap considerably with yours. Not that you have to do it the exact same way that they did it, but you have to have somebody who's an expert in the field that you're interested in. Oftentimes, I certainly had only a fairly general idea of what I was interested in researching when I got to graduate school, and I kind of whittled it down and narrowed it down as I took classes, and that certainly is a fine way to go. But the more narrow you can be, the more of an idea of the type of research that you're interested in before you get to graduate school, the easier it is for you to choose a program, right? Because what you do is you find the work that these faculty are doing, you say, I like that, and I'm specifically interested in this part of what they're doing, and then you apply to those programs where they work. Maybe even you send an email to them beforehand, talking to them a little bit about their research, and that's a way to decide where should I go and what course should I take. So that's when I consider a variety of faculty on that. Consider a variety of disciplines. Right? As you're considering faculty, maybe you see, oh, this person is an anthropologist, right? Or this person is a sociologist or a geographer. Global studies is a great first degree to get because I think it incorporates scholarship from all of these areas, from a group of areas. Political science, certainly sociology, anthropology, geography, and that's just those are just the ones that I'm particularly influeed by, but there's probably go much further than that, probably. And so history, right, would be another one. And so consider multiple courses, right? Even one. I know a lot of people in this class are often interested in international development, and there are specific master's degrees that would be great to apply for international development in particular. But think about what's involved in international development, and think about different disciplines that would have something to say about that. And again, right, I'm going to say sociology, anthropology, geography would be interested. Political science certainly would be interested in that. History would be interested in that. There's all sorts of other things that would be too, right? So consider a wide variety. Oftentimes, especially in the social sciences, you'll find that there's often not prerequisite courses, prerequisite degrees that you've got to have. You wouldn't have to find a global studies master's, although those exist and would be well worth checking out. Maybe you find an anthropology one or a sociology one. So keep your minds open there. And again, a really great way to select it, if you have the luxury of knowing what you're interested in, like having a specific thing in mind, is to find the faculty that are working on that and apply to those programs. So I'd like to see you do that this week. I'm interested. Check out Blackboard for the full instructions on this of what I want you to include in there. But I think this would be a great exercise. Even if you're sure you're not going to go to graduate school, you will at least have considered what you might study and what that might look like throughout the course of this week. And you'll hand that in for a grade at the end of Wednesday, by the end of Wednesday at the latest. Okay, I could talk about this for a long time. There's tons of stuff that I haven't talked to you about. If anything I've said has caused you more questions, has prompted questions in your mind, I'd be very, very happy to answer them as best I can, and to refer you probably other places sometimes too. But I'll be happy to try and answer any questions that you have. If you want to send me an email, and other than that, I look forward to reading your research of graduate school programs in the coming week.